Hello? Okay. Testing. Apa dah? Yeah, hang up. Are you going to cue me? Or I just wait for montage? Okay. Hi there, these are lead stories. Home Minister says stern action against those who violated COVID-19 SOP to perform Idul Adha prayers in Juru Penang. And the Tokyo 2020 chief doesn't rule out cancelling the games. On the show later, I will be speaking. I'm Jessie Chahal. You're watching this edition of the Midday Update. Let's begin with this. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong Sultan Abdullah and Raja Permaisuri Agong Tunku Haja Aziza Amina have expressed their condolences to the family of former national cyclist Jusuf Udin, who passed on yesterday. Now, according to a statement uploaded to the Facebook page of and remain strong in this time of grief. Jusuf, 61, won a hat-trick of silver medals back at the SEA Games in 1977, right here in Kuala Lumpur, and then in 1979 in Jakarta, and in 1981 in Manila. He also represented the national cycling team at the Asian Games in India back in 1982. May he rest in peace. Moving on, stern action will be taken against individuals who have violated SOPs while performing the Idul Adha prayers in Seberang Perai Tengah in Penang just yesterday morning. Home Minister Datuk Sri Hamzah Zainuddin says strict action will also be taken against those who organised the open area session, as featured in a video clip that has now, of course, gone viral on social media. In this clip, it shows hundreds of individuals allegedly performing the Idul Adha prayers in Taman Pelangi in Juru. Now, this video was met with heavy backlash, as you imagine, from netizens, with some questioning the lack of enforcement by the authorities. Once again, to reiterate, the onus also lies on us as individuals. We really do need to adhere to SOPs, especially now when we see cases, of course, are not just rising but also worrying in terms of the variants as well. Now, meanwhile, police have detained 49 men to assist the probe into viral video footage showing more than 200 Muslims believed to be foreigners praying in the open outside Surau Taman Pelangi yesterday morning in conjunction with the Idul Adha celebration. Penang Police Chief Datuk Muhammad Suhaili Muhammad Zain says 48 of the men nabbed were Bangladeshis, while the last was a local man, adding that all were aged between 20s and 40s. Suhaili says initial investigations have revealed that more than 200 people had gathered to pray in the open at the Surau after it exceeded its only 100 people. On another note, 30 foreigners and a local woman were arrested today after they were believed to have violated the SOP by attending a feast in conjunction with Hari Raya Idul Adha again at a house in Batu Caves. According to the Gombak Police Chief, 29 men and 2 women, all aged between 20 and 40, were arrested in a raid after the police received a public tip-off. And today, the Malaysian Employers Federation, or MEF, has called on the government to urgently accelerate the National Recovery Plan to Phase 3 and Phase 4 to ensure the survival of businesses, particularly those in the non-essential sectors such as fashion, textile, and even apparel industries. Its president, Dato Syed Hussein Syed Human, also stressed that prolonged movement control orders that have remained in force since March of last year continue to devastate businesses and employment. And on the side, besides all of that, in the meantime, the Deputy Prime Minister has advised for the humanitarian mission for Palestine, or the HM4P team in Cairo, Egypt, to return to Malaysia, saying the situation in Gaza remains uncertain. Now, his message is clear. He says, bring the team home and wait for the situation to stabilize and then plan to go back to Gaza. And in the meantime, according to Dato Sri Dr. Wee Ka Siong, agencies under the Transport Ministry have been instructed to collect the names of e-hailing drivers and P-hailing drivers in the country for vaccination purposes. We added that as frontliners serving the public during this lockdown period, they should also be given priority in terms of vaccination to ensure their own safety as well as that of their customers. His ministry is also working closely with the COVID-19 immunization task force in an effort to achieve group immunization as early as possible. It does seem that we are headed that way, but once again, we all need to do our part. Hey, if you haven't registered on the MySejahtera app for your vaccination, please do so. And do remember, if you have a dependent, an elderly, a parent, a loved one, you can also include them within your app as well. Now, University Malaya's Tropical Infectious Diseases Research and Education Center is hoping to determine whether booster shots are needed as more COVID-19 variants emerging and shifting the goalposts on immunity levels that vaccines can offer. This, of course, force is embarking on a study to monitor the antibody profiles of those who have been vaccinated and those who are infected with the virus over a year. Its main spokesperson and director said the end game is to establish whether the booster shots are compulsory in reducing the severity of infections. Vaccination, of course, is a surefire way for us to get out of this problem. Will it eradicate the virus completely? We're not sure at this point, but we all still need to do our part. Now, this is a media release from MACFA, that is the Malaysian Association of Theme Park and Family Attractions. They have handed over a letter to the Prime Minister together with a comprehensive position paper entitled Reimagining the Malaysian Tourism Economy. What will it take? Its president, Tan Sri Richard Koh, says the comprehensive paper contains 8 clear thrusts and 13 specific initiatives that the government must take for the tourism industry to revive. Richard says 3.6 million jobs are at stake and the tourism industry has already mounted losses of over 100 billion. Now, with all that in mind, to weigh in on the current situation, joining me right now is Peter Nicol, of course, Crisis Communications Analyst. We speak to Pete on a regular basis. Welcome back, Pete. It's good to speak to you once again. I said this yesterday on air, but I'll say it again. I'm working from home, finally, Pete.
You see you on this new sort of app that we've got here. It's a very, very different game when you're working from home, though.
It is. Just moments before we went on air, Pete saw that my son ran into the room. And so whatever happens behind the scenes stays behind the scenes. But we've got lots to talk about. Of course, in the news, what we've been seeing in the recent past, of course, the Prime Minister made this statement, which many people, are welcoming with open arms. He says they are considering a movement control relaxation for those who have received 2 vaccine doses, meaning to say they've completed their vaccination. And then also that we're expected to move into phase 2 of the recovery plan in early August. That's not too far away, as well as knowing that our COVID-19 vaccination rate now exceeds world average. Malaysia seems to be on the right track to achieve herd immunity. With all that in mind, this seems like, a lot of good news that's coming out. From your perspective, are we on the right track?
What we've seen over the last few weeks, despite the increase in numbers, which was to be expected. When you look at, what can be and should be done in terms of crisis management, the government has certainly moved according to, recognized protocols that we use and that others in our industry use. And also they've adjusted for developing threats and events, which is also really clever. We do expect to see some positive moves from these results in the next few weeks. States moving through the NRP 4 phases. and also, some relief, as you mentioned, for those who are double vaccinated, which should hopefully also encourage those who have not yet gone for vaccines to do so. So we would, in that kind of evaluation, see that Malaysia is very much on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things to consider here as well. While we're on the right track, what we've been hearing is that there's a lot of negativity in the air, or in the air. How should the government work with this, especially in triaging what to do next? What I'm referring to, Pete, is the noise on social media in terms of how the government or how we as a people are managing the pandemic. Where are we at this point?
Yeah, the pessimism is to be expected, really, Jesse, as it's been a really long period that we've had to work with the various regulations in place, and people talk about pandemic fatigue, and it's real. So that pessimism obviously will be there. We're still very much in the management phase of the pandemic. We're not moving into the recovery phase yet, although we can see clear guidelines now on how we move into that formal recovery stage through the NRP and its various phases. So a little more patience as things get under control, and then we will likely see this phased approach moving the nation towards the major recovery that we all want.
Well, okay, Pete. So you, of course, work on the international circuit, on the international network. You are in touch with many of those who are looking perhaps for opportunities here in Malaysia as well. What are investors looking out for, and what are some of their concerns? What has come to your ears, Pete?
Yeah, we did see a bit of movement out of the Malaysian markets earlier this week, but more in expectation of movement in the US market and a slight adjustment of various portfolios. But this was before we saw the Fitch ratings, affirming that Malaysia's long-term foreign currency default rating is now at BBB plus. With a stable outlook, which is an incredibly positive thing that investors and foreign nationals are looking at. The discussions that we have around Malaysia still remain very positive, with a global perspective really being on the vaccination rollout and the increased levels of immunization in the country. But political instability does still remain a real concern, and investors want to see
Right, Pete, a bit of a glitch there perhaps in the last few seconds, but it's been a few days since a Freedom Day. What is it looking like in the UK and, of course, your homeland, Scotland?
It's a very mixed bag in the UK between the four different nations there. Scotland's looking pretty good. I'm happy to say we have the fastest vaccine rollout in the UK, one of the fastest now in Europe. The numbers are beginning to drop as opposed to England, where the numbers are being recorded are at their highest since January this year. So we're happy about that. We're also taking in Scotland a much more cautious approach, retaining some of the restrictions that England have abandoned on the 19th of July. So what we're seeing is it does seem that there is a significant majority backlash against the lifting of restrictions in England at the moment, as people are still quite correctly concerned, especially after the claim Mr. Johnson has got the lifting terribly wrong at this time, too early. There appears to be a significant attitude that this is more of a COVID surrender day rather than a Freedom Day in England. So I think we can probably expect to see a significant increase in daily caseloads, unfortunately, and fatalities in England over the next 10 days or so. And of course, the other thing that I know everybody's been watching, which is really important, is the political situation. It's incredibly unstable after the revelations from the PM's former advisor, Dominic Cummings, that Mr. Johnson did in fact go for herd immunity without sufficient vaccine load in the community, and therefore, put incredible risk on particularly the older part of the population. So that's going to play out very heavily over the next week or so. And I think Mr. Johnson is under some considerable pressure with that.
I just want to jump in here to say, what does it take to urge people or to nudge people towards getting vaccinated? We see that, okay, we have a good rate, so to say. We're doing quite well. You said Scotland was the fastest in the UK. But what does it take in terms of when we're in the midst of a crisis? From your perspective, how do you bridge that gap?
It's really difficult because every nation has, a different set of social values. In Asia, particularly, the social values are very good. That when the government says you need to do this, you tend to do it because A, you believe in the government, and B, that the values that people have around community, around family, are so much stronger. And in nations where we're seeing a problem with that, are those nations that don't have that bonding. So I think that one of the keys would be to help to elaborate from a government's perspective on this community spirit. That we're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for your family, you're doing it for your neighbors, you're doing it for health.
Right, Pete. Okay, interestingly, the team spoke to a celebrated science journalist, Miss Deborah McKenzie. She points out that Malaysia is doing okay, as we've established, but in the long term, she believes that we have to lead in the area of vaccine design production, so that we are well prepared if in any instance there's a future pandemic. What are your thoughts on that?
I like Deborah very much. I think she's a really, really smart cookie, and she certainly knows what she's talking about, so we should listen to her. Absolutely. I think that one of the keys, as Deborah highlighted, is that nobody was really properly prepared for the pandemic of this nature, and we should have been. And we certainly need to be. So, while countries will need to have a capability to react and produce effective countermeasures, globally, we also need to have some kind of efficiency standards and plans in place that domestically, but that has to be part of a global initiative to deal with this, as we've seen what happens when you don't have that with this COVID pandemic. So Deborah's got that absolutely spot on, I think.
Right, definitely something for us to work towards now and take the lead in that sector or area as well. Well, Pete, lately it seems there's a mix and match of info as well on social media versus the mainstream news as well. What would your suggestion be to win this war once and for all?
It's pretty basic right now, Jesse. Keep it simple. The simple things normally always work. Keep rolling out the immunization program as fast and as efficiently as possible. Keep going on with the non-compliance with the regulations. If people will not comply, force them to comply. We have to do that. It's for everybody. And ongoing support, of course, for individuals and business units impacted. And if they do that, then the government, keeping it simple, will be very successful as we get into the recovery stage.
Okay, Pete, finally, before I let you go, we just heard from the Malaysian Association of Theme Park and Family Attractions. Its president, in a statement just released, has stated 3.6 million jobs are at stake in the tourism industry, has already mounted losses of over 100 billion. Of course, with the MCO and us, in a lockdown, there seems to be no other choice. But they say they've come up with what they call a comprehensive paper. It's entitled Reimagining the Malaysian Tourism Economy. What will it take? We sent it to you earlier today. I'm sure you have had a look at it. What are your thoughts, Pete?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, there are a number of very valid points in this report that we see, being discussed by governments globally as well. But the main issue here is that domestic tourism, whilst it will help this particular sector and the economy, in general is not the main driver. International tourism is. And until vaccination passports are agreed and other countries begin to open up, the Malaysian government and the country's tourism sector really aren't in control of variables that are going to be driven by other countries. So whilst we can prepare for the opening up of the sector, there's not a lot that we can physically do at the moment, as I said, when we are dependent on variables and what is happening with the pandemic in other countries.
Peter, thank you so much. I guess that sums up our discussion today. Wish you well. Do take care and stay safe. And we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Jesse. Stay safe.
Thank you so much, Pete. That was Peter Nicole giving his perspective on the current situation. Moving on to business, Bursa Malaysia has opened marginally higher today after its one-day break from the Idul Adha celebration, taking its cue from the better overnight performance of the Wall Street. Now, according to dealers, the UN stock markets clawed back losses after a global rout on Monday as investors shifted their focus to economic growth and downplayed concerns on the spread of the Delta COVID-19 variant. Nevertheless, buying interests emerged in selected recovery-themed sectors after the EMCO was lifted in Selangor and in Kuala Lumpur. And moving on as to what I mentioned earlier at the opening of the program, the chief of the Tokyo 2020 organizing committee yesterday did not rule out cancelling the Olympics if COVID-19 cases spiked, as more athletes are being tested positive for the virus and sponsors have ditched plans to attend Friday's opening ceremony. Asked at a news conference if the global sporting showpiece might be cancelled, he says he would keep an eye on infection numbers and liaise with other organizers if necessary. So basically, the Olympics was meant to take place without spectators. Japan this month decided to that all participants would compete in empty venues to minimize any health risk. So this is what it's come down to. The new norm for sure. Now, in brief, let's move around the globe in bite sizes. Let me take you around the world in brief now. In the Middle East, Hajj pilgrims in Mina have used sanitized pebbles for stoning. Muslim pilgrims, they had cast sanitized pebbles just yesterday as they took part in the stoning of the devil, the last major ritual of this year's Hajj, which is again under tight coronavirus restrictions. Now we move on to Thailand. The Thai cabinet yesterday has extended the state of emergency nationwide for 2 months until the end of September to cope with the local COVID-19 situation. Thailand has over 4.26 million cases. And while the rest of us are trying to make ends meet, Amazon magnate Bezos blasts into space on his own rocket. The wealthiest man on the planet at this moment in time, Jeff Bezos, lifted off on his own rocket and reached outer space yesterday. Now, check this out. Listen to this. Apparently, this is a key moment for a fledgling industry seeking to make the final frontier accessible to elite tourists. We'll talk about the tourism sector growing at these times. And mandatory military service for women to be introduced in South Korea. Don't worry, not here in Malaysia just yet. At least if what some of the presidential hopefuls are saying comes to fruition. Candidates from both the liberal ruling and conservative opposition parties have been espousing the military service in their speeches, with some saying this is a step towards gender equality. Well, I'll leave you with that. That's all for now. Thank you so much for being with me. Remember the hashtag Kita Jaga Kita. It means something. We need to look out for each other. If you haven't called a friend or a loved one in a long time during this lockdown, when we're separated by miles and spaces, perhaps pick up that phone and give them a call to say you're thinking of them. And if you can, please stay indoors as much as possible, and do remember to register for your vaccination through your MySejahtera app. I'm Jessie Chahal. This has been the Midday Update. Thanks for watching.